My name is Joyce, and at 65 years old, I never imagined my only son would abandon me at Istanbul Airport with no passport, no money, and no way home. Brian had always been ambitious, but I never thought he would leave his own mother stranded in a foreign country just to get his hands on my house. What he didn't count on was my lifetime of solving problems as a teacher. The look on his face when he opened our front door and found me sitting there waiting for him was something I'll never forget. Before I tell you how I managed to get back home before my son and what happened when he opened that front door, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to teach someone a lesson they'll never forget. Brian was my only child, my pride and joy. After his father William died when Brian was just 12, it was just the two of us against the world. I poured everything into being both mother and father to him, working extra hours as a high school English teacher to provide the life William would have wanted for our son. Our home in the suburbs of Boston was William's legacy. He had built much of it himself, a beautiful two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a maple tree in the front yard that William had planted when Brian was born. Every corner of that house held memories of our family whole and then broken but always filled with love. I sacrificed nearly all my savings to put Brian through college, something William and I had dreamed of together. We wanted our son to have opportunities we never had. When Brian graduated from business school, I felt like all those years of struggle had been worth it. I was so proud watching him accept his diploma, thinking of how proud William would have been too. But things began to change after Brian met Melanie during his final year of college. She was beautiful and ambitious with a sharp mind for business and an even sharper eye for status. At first, I was happy Brian had found someone who seemed to match his intelligence and drive. However, as the years passed, I noticed Brian changing. His calls became less frequent, his visits shorter. Money and success seemed to be all that mattered to both of them. 2 years ago, I retired after 40 years of teaching. I had a comfortable pension, the house was paid off, and I had modest savings set aside. I was looking forward to a peaceful retirement, perhaps volunteering at the local library or taking some of those art classes I never had time for. That was when Brian started making comments about my house being too big for one person and how I was wasting space. He would bring up maintenance costs and how difficult the stairs might become as I got older. "Mom, you should really think about downsizing to a nice retirement community," he would say during his increasingly rare visits. "It would be so much easier for you. You wouldn't have to worry about yard work or repairs." Each time, I would smile and say I was perfectly capable of managing my home. The truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the house William had built for us. It was my last physical connection to him, filled with 30 years of memories. Sometimes I caught Brian looking around the house with calculating eyes, as if mentally assessing its value. Once, I overheard him on the phone telling someone about the prime real estate his mother was sitting on. I tried to dismiss these moments as paranoia on my part. After all, this was my son, the little boy I had raised with all the love in my heart. Surely he wouldn't be plotting to take my home from me. So when Brian and Melanie surprised me with a trip to Turkey for my 65th birthday, I was genuinely touched. It seemed like such a thoughtful gesture, especially since they insisted on paying for everything. "You deserve to see the world, Mom," Brian said, showing me the brochures of Istanbul's beautiful mosques and markets. "Dad would have wanted you to travel and enjoy your retirement." It was the first time in years that Brian had mentioned his father without changing the subject immediately afterward. That alone made me accept the offer without hesitation. Perhaps this trip would help us bridge the growing distance between us. If only I had recognized it for what it truly was, the first step in their plan to get rid of me. I had never been outside the United States before. The farthest I'd traveled was to California for a teaching conference in the 1990s. Turkey seemed so exotic, so full of history and culture. I spent weeks researching the sites I wanted to visit, practicing a few Turkish phrases, and even buying a new suitcase for the occasion. The first few days in Istanbul were magical. The Blue Mosque, Hagia Sophia, the Grand Bazaar. Everything was more beautiful than I could have imagined. Brian and Melanie seemed unusually attentive, taking photos of me at every site, making sure I was comfortable in the hotel, asking what I wanted to do each day. It wasn't until our third night during a dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Bosphorus that the first real red flag appeared. "Mom, have you updated your will recently?" Brian asked, swirling his wine glass casually as if he'd just asked about the weather. I nearly choked on my food. My will, no, not since your father passed. Why would I need to? It's just good practice, Melanie chimed in. And what about the house paperwork? Is it all in order? As far as I know, I replied, feeling a strange chill despite the warm evening. Brian, why are you asking about this now? We're on vacation. Just looking out for you, Mom, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We don't want any complications as you get older. Later that night, I got up to get a glass of water and passed by Brian and Melanie's hotel room door, which was slightly ajar. Their voices drifted out, hushed but clear in the quiet hallway. She has no idea about the plan, Melanie was saying. It's all going perfectly. Let's not celebrate yet, Brian replied. We still have to get through the rest of the trip without her suspecting anything. I froze, my heart pounding. What plan were they talking about? I hurried back to my room, telling myself they could have been discussing anything, a surprise party for me, perhaps, or some business matter. The next day, I noticed Brian's increasing impatience whenever I wanted to stop and enjoy a sight or take photos. We have a schedule to keep Mom, he would say, checking his watch constantly. On the 5th day of our trip, we had dinner at a restaurant in the historic district. To my surprise, a man approached our table, greeting Brian warmly. Alan! What a coincidence finding you here, Brian exclaimed, though something in his tone suggested it was anything but coincidental. Alan was introduced as an old friend from law school who happened to be vacationing in Istanbul at the same time. He joined us for dinner, and the conversation quickly turned to properties and investments. Have you made those arrangements we discussed? Alan asked Brian at one point. We're working on it, Brian replied, glancing at me briefly. The property transfer should happen soon. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. That night, I called my friend Martha back in Boston using the hotel room phone since Brian had insisted on holding all our cell phones to avoid international charges. Martha, Brian's been asking strange questions about my will and the house, I said, keeping my voice low. And today he met with a lawyer friend who mentioned property transfers. Martha's voice came back concerned. Joyce, that's odd because Brian called me last week asking if I knew which bank held your mortgage papers. He said you had asked him to check something for you. I never asked him anything like that, I replied, the knot in my stomach tightening. That night, I confronted Brian in the hotel lobby. Is there something going on that I should know about? Why are you asking about my will and the house? He laughed, though it sounded forced. Mom, you're getting paranoid in your old age. This is vacation brain playing tricks on you. Let's just enjoy our last few days here. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that my son, my only child, wasn't plotting something behind my back. So I pushed my concerns aside and tried to enjoy the remainder of our trip. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Our final day in Turkey arrived all too quickly. We packed our bags, checked out of the hotel, and took a taxi to Istanbul Airport for our flight back to Boston. Everything seemed normal as we entered the bustling terminal, rolling our suitcases toward the check-in counters. That's when Brian suddenly stopped and checked his phone. Mom, there's been a change of plans. Melanie and I need to take an earlier flight. There's an emergency at work we have to deal with. What? But what about me? I asked, confusion washing over me. Don't worry, I've rescheduled your flight for later today. You just need to go to gate 32B in about 3 hours. The airline has all your information, Brian said, already moving toward a different check-in counter. But shouldn't I come with you to change my ticket? I asked, trying to follow him. No need, it's all done online, Melanie said, stepping between us. Oh, and we'll take your carry-on with your purse so you don't have to lug it around while waiting. Before I could protest, Brian had my purse in his hand. Your boarding pass is in your jacket pocket. We really have to run now or we'll miss our flight. Love you, Mom. And just like that, they disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing alone and confused in the middle of Istanbul Airport. For the first hour, I simply waited at the gate Brian had directed me to. When no flight information appeared on the screens, I approached an airline employee showing her the boarding pass Brian had left with me. The woman frowned, examining the paper. I'm sorry, but this is not a valid boarding pass. It appears to be a fake. My blood ran cold. What do you mean fake? There is no flight scheduled from this gate today and this airline code doesn't exist, she explained gently. Do you have your passport and ticket information? That's when it dawned on me. My passport was in my purse. My purse was with Brian. My money, my credit cards, my phone, everything was gone. My son, I stammered. My son took my passport and all my documents. He said he was taking an earlier flight. The airline staff helped me check the departure boards. Sure enough, there had been a flight to Boston an hour earlier. Brian and Melanie were already in the air flying home without me. As the reality of my situation sank in, I remembered Brian's strange behavior that morning. How he had insisted on packing my carry-on for me. How he had kept checking his watch. How he had barely hugged me goodbye. My son had abandoned me in a foreign country thousands of miles from home, with no identification, no money, and no way to get back. I searched my pockets frantically and found only a few Turkish lira, enough for perhaps a cup of coffee, certainly not a hotel room or a new ticket home. The airport staff directed me to the U.S. Embassy information desk, where a harried official informed me that getting emergency travel documents would take several days, especially since it was a Friday afternoon. "Do you have anyone who can help you, family or friends in Istanbul?" the official asked. I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "No one. I'm completely alone." It was the lowest moment of my life, worse than when William died, because at least then I had Brian to live for. Now I understood that my son had deliberately planned to strand me here, thousands of miles from home. But why? As I sat on a bench trying not to completely break down, a Turkish woman about my age approached me. She had been standing behind me at the information desk and had overheard my predicament. "You can use my phone to call someone in America," she offered in accented English, holding out her cell phone. With shaking hands, I dialed Martha's number, praying she would answer an international call from an unknown number. "Martha," I sobbed when she picked up. "It's Joyce. Brian left me at the Istanbul airport. He took my passport, my money, everything." "What?" Martha gasped. "Joyce, this is insane. But listen carefully. Brian called me an hour ago saying you decided to extend your trip for a few weeks. He said you fell in love with Turkey and wanted to stay longer." My blood turned to ice. "He's lying, Martha. I think he planned this all along." "Joyce," Martha's voice became very serious, "there's something else you need to know. Brian has been talking to realtors about your house. I think he's planning to sell it." And suddenly, all the pieces fell into place. The questions about my will, the comments about the house being too big, the meeting with the lawyer friend. This wasn't just about abandoning me. This was about getting me out of the way so Brian could take my house. My son had left me stranded across the world so he could steal my home. That night, I slept in a small hotel near the airport, owned by the cousin of the kind Turkish woman who had helped me. Fatima, as she introduced herself, refused to leave me alone in my distress. "My cousin's hotel is simple but clean," she said. "And for tonight, you will be our guest. Tomorrow we will solve your problems." Alone in the small room, I finally let the tears flow freely. My own child, the baby I had nursed, the boy I had raised alone after William died, the young man whose education I had sacrificed for, he had discarded me like unwanted baggage. I remembered William's words from years ago when we had discovered a friend had been embezzling from his business. "Trust, once broken, can never be fully restored. The crack will always be visible even if you glue the pieces back together." Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares of being forever lost in a foreign land. When morning came, I felt hollowed out but somehow clearer. The shock had worn off, leaving behind a cold, hard understanding of what I needed to do. Fatima's cousin allowed me to use the hotel phone to call Martha again. "I've been doing some digging," Martha said immediately. "Joyce, it's worse than we thought. Brian has been accessing your bank accounts." "What? How is that possible?" "Remember when you had that hospital stay last year for your hip? Brian helped you with your online banking while you were recovering. I bet he kept all your information." My mind flashed back to Brian sitting at my kitchen table, my banking details spread out before him, assuring me he was just helping organize my finances. "There's more," Martha continued. "He's in massive debt, Joyce. Gambling, failed investments, I don't know what else, but he's underwater, and I think he sees your house as his lifeline." I closed my eyes, pain washing through me anew. My son was not just betraying me. He was desperate. Somehow that made it both more understandable and more terrifying. "What do I do now, Martha? I'm stuck in Istanbul, and he's back there selling my house out from under me." I've contacted Amir, Martha said. Amir, my former student. Yes, he's a lawyer now, remember international law, he's already making calls to help you. Amir Patel had been one of my brightest students 15 years ago. I had written him glowing recommendations for law school, and we had kept in touch over the years through Christmas cards and occasional emails. Within an hour, Amir himself called the hotel. Mrs. Anderson, his familiar voice came through the line, formal as always. This is completely unacceptable what has happened to you. I've already contacted the U.S. Embassy in Istanbul and explained the situation. They'll expedite your emergency documentation. Amir, I can't thank you enough, I said, my voice breaking. You changed my life with your belief in me, Mrs. Anderson. Now let me help you. I also have a colleague in Boston who will secure your property immediately. As I hung up the phone, something shifted inside me. The tears and shock were giving way to something else, determination. My son thought he had left behind a helpless old woman, but he was about to face the teacher who never tolerated cheaters. I met with embassy officials that afternoon, telling them my story. The young woman processing my case was visibly outraged. This is elder abuse and theft, she stated firmly. We can file charges if you wish. I considered it for a moment. Not yet. First I need to get home and secure my property. Then we'll see what kind of lesson my son needs to learn. They took my photograph for emergency travel documents, and Amir's intervention seemed to work miracles. What would normally take days was being processed in hours. As I waited, I realized that what Brian had done wasn't just cruel, it was criminal. He had effectively kidnapped me by taking my identification and abandoning me in a foreign country. He had stolen from me by taking my purse and accessing my accounts. And now, he was attempting to steal my home. My sadness hadn't disappeared, but it was now fuel for a fire of righteous anger and determination. I wasn't just going to get home. I was going to teach my son the most important lesson of his life. Thanks to Amir's connections, my emergency travel documents were ready the next day. Fatima and her cousin refused to accept any promises of future payment for the hotel stay. When my daughter visits America someday, perhaps you will help her, Fatima said, embracing me. This is how the world should work. Before leaving Istanbul, I made 3 crucial calls. First to my bank, alerting them to unauthorized access and freezing all my accounts. Second to Martha, asking her to meet me at the airport in Boston. And third to Amir, confirming his colleague would meet me with keys to my house after changing all the locks. The flight home was long, but I barely noticed the hours passing. I sat next to an elderly gentleman who turned out to be a retired judge. After hearing a simplified version of my situation, he offered some advice. Document everything, he said firmly. Every unauthorized transaction, every communication. The law is on your side, but evidence makes your case stronger. I landed in Boston 3 days after Brian had abandoned me. Martha was waiting at arrivals, along with a sharp-looking woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Sarah Amir's colleague. We have a lot to do and not much time, Sarah said after a brief greeting. According to our information, your son is on vacation in the Bahamas and due back in 4 days. That gives us time to secure your property and gather evidence. Martha hugged me tightly. My son Kevin changed all your locks yesterday. He's a locksmith, thank goodness. The 3 of us drove directly to my home. Everything looked the same from the outside, the maple tree. William had planted the wraparound porch, the blue shutters. But when I stepped inside, I could immediately sense that someone had been searching through my belongings. Some of my things are missing, I said, looking around the living room. William's antique pocket watch that had always sat on the mantel was gone. So were the pearl earrings he had given me for our 20th anniversary. Let's do a thorough inventory, Sarah suggested, pulling out a notepad, and then set up security. Over the next few hours, we discovered more missing items, important documents from my filing cabinet, family heirlooms, and, strangely, most photos of William. In Brian's old room, which he still used as an office when visiting, we found the smoking gun draft contracts for the sale of my house to a development company, with Brian listed as the seller. The documents were preliminary but included forged signatures that looked vaguely like mine. This is criminal, Sarah said, photographing everything. Forgery, fraud, theft, elder abuse, not to mention what he did in Istanbul, which could involve international charges. She helped me install security cameras at all entrances and main rooms connected to an app on a new phone she provided. Martha's son Kevin returned to add extra security measures to the doors and windows. That night, after Martha and Sarah left, I sat alone in William's old armchair, touching his photograph, one of the few Brian hadn't taken. "I won't let him take your legacy," I whispered to the image of my late husband. "The home you built for us won't be stolen by our son." The next 3 days were a flurry of activity. I revoked all powers of attorney Brian might claim, created a new will with Amir's help, explicitly excluding Brian from inheriting the house, and documented every unauthorized transaction I could find in my bank records. I informed my trusted neighbors about the situation, asking them to alert me if they saw Brian. I even filed a report with the local police, creating an official record of what had happened in Istanbul and my concerns about property theft. And then I waited. The security cameras would alert me when Brian arrived. The stage was set for his homecoming lesson. 4 days after my return, my phone buzzed with a security alert. The camera at my front door showed Brian and Melanie pulling into the driveway in their luxury SUV. They looked tanned and relaxed, clearly having enjoyed their Bahamas vacation while I was fighting to get home from Istanbul. I positioned myself in William's armchair in the darkened living room, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. From my vantage point, I could see the front door without being immediately visible to anyone entering. Brian tried his key in the front door, frowning when it didn't work. He tried again, jiggling the handle with increasing frustration. I watched as he walked around the porch, attempting the side door with the same result. "The locks have been changed," I heard him tell Melanie through the security audio. "She must have gotten back somehow." "That's impossible," Melanie replied. "Even if she somehow got emergency papers, she wouldn't be back for weeks. And she has no money." Brian's face hardened. "Wait here. I know where Mom keeps the spare key." He disappeared from view, and minutes later I heard the back door open. The security alert buzzed again on my phone, showing Brian entering through the kitchen. I waited, listening to his footsteps moving through the house toward the living room. When he flipped on the light switch, I was sitting calmly in his father's chair, hands folded in my lap. "Oh, you're back," I said pleasantly, as if greeting him after a normal day at work. "How was the rest of your trip?" Brian's face drained of color. He stumbled backward, nearly falling over the coffee table. "Mom, what? You're supposed to be in Turkey." "Am I?" I asked, my voice still conversational but with an edge of steel. "Is that where sons typically leave their mothers these days, stranded in foreign airports without money or identification?" "I can explain," he stuttered, his eyes darting around as if looking for escape routes. "There was a mix-up with the flights and—" "Stop lying, Brian." I cut him off. "I know everything, the fake boarding pass, the plans to sell my house, the stolen heirlooms, the forged documents." From outside came the sound of a car door slamming. Melanie had apparently decided to join us. She stepped through the front door using the spare key Brian had found, then froze when she saw me. "Joyce, you're here. What a surprise." She managed her designer handbag clutched tightly to her chest. "Indeed," I replied. Almost as surprising as discovering my son planned to sell my house out from under me while I was trapped in Istanbul. "Mom, you don't understand," Brian said, finding his voice again. "We're in trouble. We need money. You're just one person in this big house." "So your solution was to abandon me in a foreign country, to steal my identification, to forge my signature?" Each question came out sharper than the last. "To steal your father's watch and my jewelry." "You never would have agreed to sell." Brian shot back, his tone suddenly defensive and accusatory. "We tried to talk to you about downsizing for years, but you're too stubborn. So you decided theft and abandonment were appropriate next steps." I asked, my voice steady, despite the pain his words caused. "Let me tell you what I've been doing since I got back Brian." I detailed all the legal changes I'd made, the police reports filed, the security installed, the new will executed. With each item I listed, Brian's face grew paler. "You can't do this to us," he finally exploded. "We need that money. My investments went bad. We're underwater on the house. There are loan sharks after me." The desperation in his voice would have broken my heart a week ago. Now it only confirmed what I already knew. My son had tried to sacrifice me to save himself from his own bad decisions. "I've called the police," I said quietly, holding up my phone. "They're on their way. Officer Wilson. You remember him? He was another one of my students, is very interested in what happened in Istanbul." Brian's face contorted with rage and fear. "This isn't over, Mom. You can't just—" He was interrupted by the sound of police sirens. I had indeed called them the moment the security alert showed Brian arriving. "Actually, it is over," I said as red and blue lights flashed through the windows. "I've taught my final lesson to you, Brian. Actions have consequences, even for sons who think their mothers are disposable." Officer Wilson, a burly man who had indeed been in my English class 15 years earlier, ensured Brian and Melanie left peacefully with a warning that there was an active investigation into the Istanbul incident and the attempted property theft. As Brian walked to his car, he turned back, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been shame. "This isn't over, Mom." "Actually, it is," I replied calmly from the porch. "I've taught my final lesson to you. Now you need to learn from it." The weeks following Brian's failed return were a mixture of sadness and liberation. I grieved for the relationship we had once had, for the little boy who had held my hand at his father's funeral, promising to always take care of me. But I also felt a profound sense of pride in having protected myself when it mattered most. I met with a financial advisor to review all my accounts and set up additional protections. Martha became an even more regular presence in my life, coming over for dinner twice a week to ensure I wasn't dwelling in loneliness. "You know what amazes me?" she said one evening as we sat on the porch. "How quickly you shifted from victim to victor. Most people would have been shattered by what Brian did." "I didn't have the luxury of falling apart," I replied, sipping my tea. "And 40 years of teaching taught me one thing. You have to hold people accountable or they never learn." 6 months after the Istanbul incident, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Anderson. This is Dr. Reynolds. I'm a therapist working with your son, Brian." I listened silently as she explained that Brian had been attending therapy to address his gambling addiction and the underlying issues that had led to his desperate plan. "He would like to apologize in person," Dr. Reynolds said, "but understands if you're not ready for that." It took another month of consideration before I agreed to meet Brian in a neutral location, Dr. Reynolds' office, with the therapist present. The man who walked in was thinner than I remembered, the confident swagger replaced by a hesitant step. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. "What I did was unforgivable. I was desperate and selfish and convinced myself you would be okay somehow. I let my financial problems and my pride drive me to betray the one person who has always been there for me." I listened without interrupting, searching his face for signs of the son I had raised. The session was difficult, filled with painful truths on both sides. I acknowledged that perhaps I had enabled some of his behavior by always being his safety net. We agreed to a very limited relationship, moving forward with strict boundaries. Family counseling sessions became a monthly occurrence with slow, cautious steps toward rebuilding some form of trust. Melanie eventually came to one of these sessions, her designer clothes replaced by something more modest, her manner subdued. "I was the one who suggested the plan," she admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "We were so desperate with the loan sharks threatening Brian, I thought since you were alone anyway, you could just stay in Turkey, maybe in a cheaper area. Start over. I never considered what that would really mean for you." The coldness of her calculations still chilled me, but I could see genuine regret in her face. I did help Brian develop a debt repayment plan with professional guidance from financial counselors. I made it clear that my home was never going to be his financial solution, but I would support his recovery in other ways. Throughout this difficult period, unexpected joys emerged. My connection with Amir deepened, and he began bringing his family for Sunday dinners once a month. Other former students reached out after hearing fragments of my story, creating a network of support that felt like a chosen family. Inspired by Fatima's kindness in Istanbul, I began volunteering at a local center teaching English to recent immigrants. The gratitude in their eyes when they mastered a difficult phrase reminded me of why I had loved teaching for so many years. Martha convinced me to join a book club specifically for women who had faced betrayal by family members. The stories I heard there of adult children stealing retirement funds, of siblings forging loan documents, made me realize I was far from alone in my experience. "The hardest part," said Eleanor, an 80-year-old whose grandson had emptied her bank accounts, is balancing love with consequences. I still love him, but I had to press charges. That was the complex truth I was living too. I still loved Brian. He was my son, my only child, my connection to William. But love didn't mean allowing him to discard me when convenient or to steal what I had worked my entire life for. Forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. Some days I felt it within reach. Other days, the memory of sitting alone and terrified in Istanbul Airport would flood back, bringing with it a fresh wave of hurt and betrayal. The most profound lesson I learned through all of this was that setting boundaries isn't just about protecting yourself from others, it's about teaching others how to treat you properly. By standing firm against Brian's attempt to take advantage of me, I had actually given him the opportunity to become a better person, to face his demons rather than trying to escape them through increasingly desperate schemes. A year after the Istanbul incident, my house remains my sanctuary, filled with memories of William and the life we built together. Brian visits occasionally, always with advance notice, always respectful of the boundaries I've established. Our relationship is different now, more cautious, more honest, perhaps even healthier in some ways. Love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be discarded. Sometimes the greatest act of love is setting boundaries that teach others how to truly value you. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between maintaining family peace and standing up for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If my experience resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding strength in challenging situations. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries, even with family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's never too late to teach or learn life's most important lessons.